Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year, ostensibly. It's day 46 of my comic review video day calendar, and I was a little bit trepidatious about covering an issue from this series because I knew it was going to basically just be more Spawn, and I said I wasn't reviewing Spawn comics this year, but it's not a Spawn comic in that it doesn't have that character in the issue, and it's not called that. But with McFarlane Spider-Man, which was massively successful, massively popular, and of course had a lot to do with why Spawn was, because it's basically that same book, except using Spider-Man to tell the kinds of stories he really wants to be doing in something like Spawn, which is a much more appropriate premise and concept for stories like this. But it is exactly the same thing. This is Spider-Man number 6. I decided, I have some of these. It'll be interesting to go back to this and retroactively, after reviewing all that Spawn, just see really how close it is. And all the way down to the lettering. I mean, it's a Spawn comic, and it's very strange thinking about what this would have been like reading it when it came out, because this would feel very original and like nothing else going on in comics. And if you didn't read this, but if you have read Spawn and you go back to it now, it feels like a weirdly derivative of a thing that comes after it, because like I said, it's so strange to do this in Spider-Man. This is like taking Kraven's Last Hunt and dialing it up to the nines with the gothic imagery and the violence, and just doing a real dark, bleak book with a character that has typically such a positive outlook. And you go, okay, why are we doing that in Spider-Man? It's because this is what McFarlane wants to be doing, and it's the character that he got at Marvel. And I think he was, happy doing that with this character. And there's kind of a cool juxtaposition, actually, to be fair, with Spider-Man's quips and how still in character he is to the lovable guy, but with a real tragic kind of history that we're used to with this character, but has basically been transported into the world of Spawn before that world even exists. But if you if you read Spawn, not having looked at this, you might think that all of those trappings are really original to a thing that is wholly brand new from the ground up with McFarlane, and it's just not true. Like, he does invent all of that himself, but it starts here. The panel layouts are exactly the same. The character models are exactly the same, all the way down to the subject matter. Hobgoblin in this is basically just the freak. He is obsessed with finding sinners and punishing them, and he's kind of schizophrenic. He has a really skewed view of reality. He sees himself as like an acolyte of God or something, and he's just going around finding people on the street that he's decided have wronged him personally because they're afraid of him and they don't like what he looks like. He's really self-conscious about his looks. And it's like he can't stand his own visage, and so when other people are afraid of him, he's decided that they're the problem, they're bad, and working for the devil, who is, he thinks, Spider-Man. Okay. By the way, I decided not to go back to Spider-Man number 1 because I think at some point I'll finally tackle Torment on a Vault altogether. And I haven't gone back to that since I was a kid. I've heard from people that have read it more recently that it's just nonsense and doesn't make a lot of sense and doesn't really hold up. This reads okay out of any sort of context. I don't know that if there's anything in the first 5 issues that make this confusing or bewildering, or if it, like, the problem here isn't really that it doesn't make sense so much as just there's a lot of weird counterintuitive choices and it doesn't get very much done, and I don't really fully understand Hobgoblin psychology and how he got to this place. It's a total reinvention of this character. Like, Hobgoblin is unrecognizable in this, and so It's a real simple issue. It's not difficult to understand, but like I said, very little happens because it's a McFarlane issue. It's all about the art before and the atmosphere and making you just feel kind of uneasy and weirded out and kind of just having fun with comic book violence again in a Spider-Man comic, and it uh, like I said, with Spawn, much of the time, if you read an issue totally out of context, it seems like everything probably makes, more or less makes sense if you've read everything that comes before it. But it really makes me wonder if there's not something. I don't mean to throw any shade at McFarlane or throw him under the bus if this is not happening, because I have not gone back to Torment. It's been years and years since I read that. But I would not be surprised if I went back to that and there's something in this that is totally contrary to what came before, because that was always my experience with Spawn. So I could give you a very quick 1 minute or less synopsis of this book because so little happens in it, but I'm going to have a lot of things, particularly in how this is just Spawn before Spawn, as we go along. So I'll just go linearly and give you my thoughts as we go. So at the beginning, but there's not a whole lot here. So at the beginning, you've got Hobgoblin, who seems to be at first reacting to his victims moaning and complaining, freaked out about what he looks like and wanting him to turn his face away from them. We can't stand looking at you. You are you're terrifying. And he's tormenting. I can't stop using that word now because of the first issue, or the first arc. That's the title, but also that word keeps coming up in this as well. But he's torturing victims that he pulls off the street because he's decided that, again, they're sinners, and just kind of arbitrarily. And it's really a schizophrenic thing. All these purple bubbles that you get on the first page are in his head, but he thinks they're coming from his victims that he's got webbed up in kind of his own special spider web that look a little bit more like insect cocoons. And there's kind of this fun bit at the beginning where he says, okay, fine, if you can't stand looking at my face, I'll take my mask off. And then when he takes his mask off, it's like the Weird Al song, he's scarier without it on. And I kind of like that reveal. That's fun. But then he decides to kill this woman. He's got a woman and her son, and she is too afraid of him, and he thinks that that is wrong and evil and a bad reflection on him, I guess. Again, his psychology is weird, and he kills her but hangs on to her son. And the first time we see them, like I said, similar character models to everything you see in Spawn. He is the freak. They are Wanda and Cyan, at least on that first panel, even though it'll turn out that he's a boy. At first, I thought that this was a little girl because it looks just like Wanda and Cyan. A little ditty about Wanda and Cyan, but it actually, of course, is not them, or that. I mean, it can't be because it's not Spawn. But she still looks a lot like Wanda, but she's got a little boy who will ultimately follow Hobgoblin around and will decide that he likes Hobgoblin and wants Hobgoblin to mentor him, and is buying the kind of religious zealot nonsense that Hobgoblin is spouting. And that's weird to me because he just killed the kid's mom, but the kid is confused and trying to cope in some way, and so maybe I could kind of see it. But the big horrifying reveal at the end of this is going to be this kid is kind of transforming into a creepy Hobgoblin himself, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Meanwhile, Peter Parker is sleeping with his wife, and that's the introduction you get for Spider-Man here. And then we jump away from him to our surprise special guest star. And again, retroactively, if you've read Spawn, you won't be that surprised by the guest star because this allows us to get even more Spawn iconography in here. I wonder if this issue, more than any other in the, 10 or 12 issues that McFarlane did before he got fed up, threw his hands in the air, said, I'm done with the censorship, and went and started his own highly successful company. I wonder if this issue, more than any of the others, is the most Spawn-like, because we're also going to get a hero from hell that made a deal with the devil and has, like, kind of sadistic pleasure in again, tormenting his victims who really are bad people and in the wrong, has a skeleton face and chains all over in every other panel. Yeah, Ghost Rider is in this issue. And Ghost Rider is going to be a little bit like Cygor was in some issues in Spawn that I made fun of during Spawn year, because he's just in the background, kind of on his way. Never meets Spider-Man in this issue. It looks like that'll happen in the next issue, but at first, you don't even know why you're looking at him. It's like we just cut over to a Ghost Rider comic because this is the kind of imagery that McFarlane really wants to get to draw. Just real dark, gothic, street-level stuff. And he likes chains. So with Spider-Man, he's doing webbing all over the place, like Spawn's chains will be later. And then you also get the chains all over the place with Ghost Rider. And we're introduced to Ghost Rider with his going after a priest that is engaging in child pornography, and the priest has this ridiculous justification that he's just taking kids off the street that aren't that special anyway and giving them a home, and so isn't it okay for him to be making them engage in pornography because at least they're not homeless anymore. And Ghost Rider's right. That's ridiculous. I don't know if I would condone his murdering this guy if that's what he did, and that's what it looks like he's doing. But then, I mean, even look at the... I'm interrupting myself, but look at the word balloon at the bottom of this page that says no. Even the lettering is exactly like it is with Spawn, where for emphasis, we go to different colors, we go to different font, and we're putting basically automatopoeia words inside of word balloons that people are actually saying, changing the kind of typeface or around the word balloon itself to denote different tones and ways people are speaking. So Ghost Rider has, and maybe he has this in his other books too, and McFarlane is just being consistent, but he's doing the Spawn thing with Ghost Rider, where you expect his voice to be real booming and otherworldly, so there's a dark outline and kind of squiggles around his word balloons. But anyway, Ghost Rider, I guess, is just intimidating this guy, hoping that he'll just knock it off. I expect him to punish this guy in some way, and that's what it seems like he's going to do, but he throws him from a high place, catches him, and he's not interrogating him, trying to get information or anything. He's just mad at him because he's done this horrible, reprehensible thing, of course. And then you think he's going to do the penance stare or something. Maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe this is the penance stare. But he doesn't say the normal thing he says with the penance stare, and I can't tell if that's what it is. And then he just leaves the guy sulking on the sidewalk and drives off. And then eventually, he's going to start actually going after Hobgoblin. I assume because the news is talking about the Hobgoblin kidnapping people. I don't know how he knows about Hobgoblin other than that. That doesn't seem to be what he's doing at the beginning of the issue, unless that's set up in a previous issue. I don't know. Todd McFarlane tends to be pretty decompressed with his storytelling. So, but considering this is a surprise guest star, I'm going to assume not, that there wasn't Ghost Rider before this. McFarlane, with the issues of this, I remember, seems to come up with an excuse to put Mary Jane in scantily clad, as little wardrobe as possible, and often underwear or lingerie, which he's done here. Spider-Man is being a workaholic, as she says, gets up in the middle of the night, is trying not to wake up Mary Jane, and then, and at least she's being reasonable. At least they don't have a big argument for the 952nd time. You need to stay here with me, don't go do your job as a superhero. Although I don't know why he's like so excited in just the middle of the night. Like there's no talk about his being like having insomnia, or he seemed to be sleeping real well in the panels we got earlier that are wasting a lot of space just to establish Peter Parker is in bed because it's nighttime. Why did it take a whole page to give us that? And like McFarlane is really good at not progressing any kind of story in an entire page. And there's another example of that we'll get to in a minute. But I guess he just is restless and feels like going out and being a superhero. Okay, I'm glad there's not an argument about it. And then we get one of McFarlane's real famous contorted full-page spreads with Spider-Man's limbs being not remotely proportionate. This is my Spider-Man. This is the one I grew up with. I love stuff like this. This is a great pinup. I would put this on my wall. And I can't decide how I feel about I think I like it. It's fun in the moment. I can see somebody complaining about it. I can't totally decide how I feel about the kind of self-awareness about the trappings of the webbing that McFarlane likes to put on the page. It's nonsensical. There's not any good reason that Spider-Man would be using so much webbing, but McFarlane loves drawing this stuff. It's like, again, it's weirdly Spawn before Spawn. Spider-Man doesn't have a cape, so he's got to have his webbing all over the place and practically tangling himself up, just like Spawn is going to have a ridiculously impossible long cape. At least he's a supernatural character, and it's a living costume. We'll find out later. So there are actually explanations for it. But here, Spider-Man says, I'm trying not to get tangled up in this webbing, and how come I shoot so much of it anyway? It's almost a fourth wall break, because, and I kind of chuckled, and like there's a part of me that's like, you shouldn't, like, it's too cutesy, you shouldn't come out and like it's a visual conceit. The only reason all that webbing there is because it looks cool, and we really need to draw attention to it. As long as we're not doing it constantly, I don't think I mind it, because I did think it was kind of fun. It was kind of clever. It's like Spider-Man almost realizing he's in a comic book page going, why did this guy draw all of this? Like, there's no reason for me to shoot all this out. McFarlane knows it himself, but it's not about the storytelling. It's that this looks cool. And it does. It still looks cool. A little dated, a little overdone, because we overdid so much stuff in the 90s, of course, and maybe I've got nostalgia blinders a little bit, because this was the stuff that really introduced me to this character, and to me, this is what Spider-Man looks like. And I've talked about this a lot in videos before. I know it's kind of odd to prefer this to Ditko and to like the super muscular Spider-Man and all of that. I get the arguments against it, and retroactively, I understand them and kind of agree with a lot of it, but I love the intimidating looking, kind of horrifying Spider-Man, especially, and again, partly in the giant eyes and the contortion. And part of that is, like I said, because that's the Spider-Man that I grew up with. And part of it is because I do kind of like the juxtaposition with this. What this has going for it over Spawn is that the protagonist is likable. And Peter is not brooding. He looks like a brooding character, but he isn't. He's got this look to him, but his personality is real lighthearted. He's still quippy. He's very much in character to the Spider-Man that you grew up with, that Stan Lee created, and he's not changed at all, even though he's been, it seems like, transplanted into Spawn's world. So anyway, we just kind of remind ourselves that Hobgoblin is our villain here, and he's grabbed this kid. I want to point out a mistake at the top of this page, because it confused me for a second, where he's still hearing all these voices in his head, thinking that his victims are talking to him, and then those are always in purple, and I like how McFarlane is always denoting the difference between a lot of characters speaking with those, with I don't know, changes in color and things, those kinds of devices. But then his balloon is also purple. So that's just a mistake. It shouldn't be. And then we go back to Ghost Rider, and he is what is he even doing here? Has he figured out the Hobgoblin thing yet? I don't remember why he's even in this panel. Oh yeah, you know what? I think this is him overhearing some cops talking about Hobgoblin's victims. That's how he finds out about it. Okay, never mind. So it's not the news. But then we get the news. Even this is exactly like it is in Spawn, almost. It's actually worse because it's 4 talking news heads instead of the typical 3, and at least you get a cool picture of Spider-Man behind it instead of them just taking up the whole page. None of this is necessary. This is a very fast read, and it's a much faster read if you somehow knew what things you can skim and just completely skip, because this doesn't drive story forward whatsoever. It does nothing to progress narrative. We know all of this. It's just talking heads on the news, I guess, just to give you a sense of scope and that the city is aware of these terrible things going on, and to make the villains seem more menacing, to make this threat seem like a bigger threat, I guess. Sometimes, usually the device with talking news heads, with, something like RoboCop, or even the way Frank Miller uses it, and I guess RoboCop probably does it because of Miller, in something like Dark Knight Returns, is to give you a semblance of what the world around the hero is like. It helps to establish tone sometimes, to establish the attitude of the public, especially in something that's more heightened or futuristic, where you have to establish not just characters, but the world, because it's so different from the one that you live in. It's totally unnecessary here, because chances are you've been in the Marvel Universe before, and they're not telling anything new. So, like, you can use it as an exposition tactic, and sometimes that's more natural than having characters in dialogue to give you exposition, but we're not learning anything new here, so it's totally pointless. And then there's this really curious couple of pages that are also kind of unnecessary. I guess you need this just so that Spider-Man can go find Hobgoblin. He finds this guy. That's the point of this, but it feels, I don't know, it feels superfluous, because it's like there's something being said here about, like, street level drug culture or something, and it's very tacked on, so it's really just a plot device to get Spider-Man to the bad guy. And it would be better if, well, I was going to say it would almost be better if you just ran into him, because, Hobgoblin's, like, right out in the open doing all these horrible things. It wouldn't be that hard to find him. I guess I like that Spider-Man's, investigating in stuff. But anyway, it's odd. It's out of place. This guy also in the face looks a lot like the Freak. And he's sniffing cocaine or some kind of powder drug, and Spider-Man says, "I'll give you your drugs back if you tell me where Hobgoblin is." I guess part of the reason this feels superfluous is I don't know why this guy knows where Hobgoblin. I guess just because he's on the street. And then he webs him up and says, "The web fluid is going to dissolve in an hour, and then you can have your drugs back." I would think Spider-Man would just confiscate it, but okay. And it's weird because he's just got this vial of the cocaine or whatever it is, but then when he pours it on the ground, it looks like this heaping mound of cocaine. And then this guy, I guess this is supposed to be funny, is like, "But what about the wind? What kind of monster are you? Like, the wind is going to blow all of his cocaine away, and he's not going to be able to have it because, he's addicted and desperate and all of that." It's a weird couple of pages. Meanwhile, Ghost Rider still trying to find Hobgoblin, or starting to try to find Hobgoblin. And then Spider-Man finally goes up against Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin reveals that he thinks that Spider-Man is the devil, and that he's, good and in the right. You've always got to have these massive, religious connotations to McFarlane stories. That's the stuff that he really wants to write. And then, like I said, at the end, the big reveal is this kid, Spider-Man's trying to save this kid from Hobgoblin, but the kid doesn't want to be saved, and he's being somehow transformed into Hobgoblin. And I don't really know how he's doing that. Maybe that's revealed in the next issue. But it's just a Spawn comic. And like I said, especially with the way it's paced and how little it gets done. But as I've always said, McFarlane is my least favorite writer and my favorite artist. This is a lot of fun to look at. It's just crazy to see all of this done with this material with Spider-Man. And the best thing about it is that juxtaposition where Spider-Man is quippy. He's having a lot of fun. McFarlane is actually good at writing that character, I think, and gives him a lot of fun, kind of sassy things to say. And I kind of wish Spawn could have somehow been a little bit more like that. That's kind of all he would have had to do to make it more readable. I mean, there's a lot of things he would have needed to do to make it make more sense, but to make me not loathe that character and for, every panel to feel depressing in the wrong way or not every panel, but, a lot of it, as it ultimately became. This is not just a prototype for Spawn, but in some ways, it is that book done quite a bit better. Anyway, at some point I'll review more of this book, probably just because it's such an interesting study in what McFarlane was interested in at that time and where his head was when he started making Spawn. So weird to see this kind of thing done with this character, and I get why Marvel didn't like it and why they didn't want him to go as heavy as he did with subject matter and as violent as he did. I also always got McFarlane's side of it. On the one hand, maybe don't do this with this character, or at least go, this far for kind of no reason. It really reads like you don't really want to be doing Spider-Man, despite the fact that you're writing that character okay. On the other hand, that is the character that he was hired to do, and from his previous work, it should have been really clear to Marvel what his sensibilities were and the kind of book he wanted to do. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Really appreciate it. This was oddly kind of fun to talk about and nostalgic, even though I definitely got PTSD flashbacks from doing Spawn Year. And weird going back to this kind of material like 10 years after I finished that show. I did not too long ago do a read down and kind of re-review of the first issue of Spawn. I did that in a live video maybe a year ago, and you can go back and take a look at that if you're so inclined. But that's the most Spawn I've read since Spawn Year. So it's really weird going back to this. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will see you again with something else tomorrow. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.